The Supreme Court has just ruled on a new decision, making it a lot harder for the Securities and Exchange Commission to go and regulate Wall Street firms. Now, this is a part of a much larger battle that I want to talk about as we discuss this current event here. It really goes to the heart of fighting the New Deal and the administrative state that FDR created in the 1930s.
And this man is the biggest fan of the New Deal that I've ever met in my life. So this must be kind of devastating.
Even fan is even the weirdest way to put it. I love learning about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good things and a lot of bad things about it.
Yeah, you've become too educated to be a hooligan about it. So
I've become too.
Your views
read
are too
much.
nuanced to be a fan.
Yeah, there's too much stuff that goes into the New Deal umbrella that was bad, that was good, for me to just say whatever. But point is, a lot of that legacy is getting thrown out, and conservatives ruled in favor of the plaintiff in this decision, which is really tackling at how the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to be able to prosecute those who break their rules. So who led this attack against the SEC? So it came against like three big players here: tech billionaires, conservative legal activists, and then business lobbyists.
Okay.
These three partners teamed up and were tackling the authority of this executive agency. But now, what's interesting about this is that this precedent won't just go after the executive agency authority in the SEC. It'll be a change to all executive agencies and how they are able to enforce their own rules that they make. And again, I want to emphasize this is a part of a much larger conservative agenda where the goal is to shrink the size of the administrative state and limit the government's ability to properly regulate the marketplace.
It's one of the oldest bastions of conservatism that exists, is small government, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to do a little bit of history first real quick and talk about what is the SEC, okay? So prior to the 1930s, there was no regulation in regards to securities, no regulation regarding to stock trading, no regulation in regards to any of that. After the Great Depression, the Securities Exchange Act was passed in 33 and 34 and another one in 34 that basically regulated how companies had to give information to the public. You had to be honest with your earnings. You had to file certain formats. You had to meet certain requirements to be on the market. All these different things, and they also set up the head, the Securities and Exchange Commissioner and his other appointed, cabinet members. I guess I don't know, like the board of the SEC.
Sure.
And then they would regulate business. Now, how this SEC has worked since then is that the SEC has an internal system of judges and courts inside of itself, which hears cases and imposes fines. And these internal courts exist across the federal government. That is how each agency enforces its own rules. The NLRB is another really good example, the National Labor Relations Board, the Federal Trade Commission, which handles all antitrust stuff, and the SEC. Those are the three examples I want to talk about. But FTC has existed since like the 1900s, and the SEC was modeled after the FTC, and the NLRB was modeled after the FTC.
Okay.
So Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the FTC and was like, the Federal Trade Commission was like, oh, wait a second, let's apply that same logic to labor.
Sure.
Wait a second, let's apply the same logic to securities exchanges. That was his mindset. All stuff I completely support. And I think has been really good for the longevity of ironing out the business cycles, making the economy more predictable, reining in the worst excesses of the market.
Okay, this is a basic idea that I would want to challenge you on, but I don't know if I should let you get through more stuff first before I get to that. My question is the idea in this case, and I think in general, is that these practices of handing over decisions of guilt or of whether people have been defrauded, whether labor has been mistreated, it is being handed to these federal agencies.
Yeah.
But we have a court system.
Right. That's exactly right. That's
what this case is working off of is, and what the majority decided, is that the SEC's in-house tribunals deciding guilt violated the Seventh Amendment's right to a jury trial.
Yes.
So you say you're in support of these federal agencies. Why do you think that the court system isn't sufficient to deal with these problems?
So the court system isn't sufficient to deal with these problems for two reasons. One, they don't have the resources. The number of federal judges that would be necessary to handle the amount of complaints that these agencies receive just doesn't exist.
Okay.
The backlog would be in the thousands. Here's you go. They don't have the judges. This is coming from a legal expert. They don't have the judges to hear all these cases.
Okay.
If they take them away from the administrative law judges, there are 10 times the number of administrative judges as there are federal judges.
Holy shit.
So the workload would be insurmountable. It's so what happens is I understand where that's coming from,
Yep.
but in practice, what that results in is nothing getting enforced.
Okay.
Now, in addition to that, these judges may not have the specific expertise.
That's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, these judges don't have the expertise. So, like these judges who are internally in the FTC, internally in the SEC, internally in the NLRB, they're labor lawyers. They're labor judges. They're security judges. They're financial regulation judges. They're not just any old federal district judge. And it's not correct to assume that every federal district judge will then have the proper knowledge on how to properly handle these cases.
Yeah.
And in addition to this, the Congress also, in their statutes forming the SEC, forming the FTC, forming the NLRB, delegated this power specifically to the agencies for enforcement. They didn't put the enforcement into the hands of the court system on purpose. They wrote it in the statutes.
Did they actually write it in the statutes?
Yes.
Or is that how
Nope, that's a whole
the
fight.
executive branch?
No, that was the whole fight of the New Deal post the National Industrial Recovery Act. The National Industrial Recovery Act set up a national labor board, but the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, did not specify who had the authority to do that regulation. So then in 1935, they passed the Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act, where it did specifically say the NLRB had the authority to adjudicate these matters. And then that is the formation of the SEC and the FTC as well.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's the foundation. That's
the foundational
yeah.
basis.
Okay.
So what this really comes down to is it's a power grab from the court.
Sure.
The court is now assuming more authority in these types of matters. And what's going to end up happening from this is these agencies are going to be neutered in the number of cases they can actually take up.
Wow.
Because there's 10 times less federal judges than there are administrative judges. And it's going to be harder for us to rein in the worst abuses of Wall Street, of the speculators, of the monopolists. We're going to have a harder time tackling those issues if we don't have this administrative system ready and prepared to go. I also want to say the court came up short of saying that the Congress overstepped in its delegatory authority to the executive branch. They didn't go that far. They could have destroyed the entire SEC.
Yeah.
Right. But they didn't do that.
Can I ask another slightly offshoot question?
Let's find out.
So the FTC, we talk about antitrust lawsuits that they bring a lot. They have to bring those into court and argue them in front of a judge that is part of the federal circuit.
Right.
Is that specific to the FTC, or do you know if the SEC operates in the same way? And sometimes, is it like sometimes they have to go into the court system and sometimes they can decide internally?
So the SEC always has where's my point here? Let me make sure I get this right, okay? I have this somewhere on my list. I want to read a little bit more here. This internal court system has been in place since the New Deal, and this decision represents a culmination of decades of decisions. I know the answer to this question, but I have a quote that talks about it. But the point is, the court, they always have the right to appeal to a federal court. The SEC can lay down a decision, stop the action, give the punishment, assign the punishment, and then they can appeal to the federal court system in all of these cases. Interesting.
So why does the SEC have the tribunal at all? Why does the SEC not just act and then they can appeal if they want?
Currently, the regulatory bodies don't go through this much of legal practice. They route the majority of their disputes through adjudicators who have the deep expertise of the subject matter.
Okay.
And then these adjudicators are the ones who eventually make sure that the bad activity stops.
Okay. So they enforce it too? They enforce the decisions in addition to deciding them?
Yeah.
The adjudicators?
Yeah. Well, enforce, what do you mean enforce? Like, they're not sending people to jail, these adjudicators.
Well, I'm wondering, like, what do you mean they make sure that the bad behavior stops? Like, I don't know. I don't understand that.
So,
right? Like, does that make sense to you?
No, it's the same way. I mean, it's the same way a guy has, black mold in his apartment, and then he gets a call from the town, and the town is like, hey, you got black mold in your apartment. Your tenant told us you have black mold. You have to fix it.
Oh, okay. So they just tell the people that they have to stop doing it.
And then,
and they're like, this is an authority, so we have to
Yes.
actually stop. Okay. I think that makes sense to me. But like you're saying, they can always appeal
to the courts.
Okay.
Here we go. Anyone dissatisfied with the outcome of the proceedings can seek review at the end of that process from the traditional federal court.
Okay. This decision seems weak to me then.
Well, if it seems, it doesn't. It only
by the
seems
Supreme Court.
It only seems weak by the Supreme Court if you're viewing it only on the paper. If you apply it to the actual effect of the fact that now step one is no longer the quick adjudication.
No. I don't mean weak in effect. I mean weak reasoning.
Oh, weak reasoning.
Yes. It seems like
because it almost seems like, wait, they do have a jury trial because you can go to the federal court, right?
Well, is it that when you appeal, you don't get a jury? Isn't that how it usually works? I think you usually appeal to a judge.
You're right.
So maybe it's specifically that the 7th Amendment is the right to a jury trial that messes them up.
Well, I just think, okay, so this is all the background. This is the thing. That's going to be the effect.
Sure.
10 times less cases going.
Yeah.
Now the question, okay, what do we do about this? And that's where I don't know the answer anymore.
Yeah.
Because if the Supreme Court is, the jury of last resort, and they have said that federal agencies can't enforce their own.
They can't adjudicate their own cases.
What do we do from there? How do we get any regulation going on now? Is it all going to be through the court system? I mean, that makes elections even more important than ever. But
doesn't it also mean we have to fund courts by millions to billions of dollars more than we currently do to build out the system?
Yeah, 10 times more.
Yeah.
10 times more to build out a system that is going to be able to handle all that. Or, right, if a Republican won't. A Republican just won't.
Sure.
Hire that, bring in that many more judges.
Yeah, so no matter what, the power of these agencies are just going to be really
with the elections
taken away.
No, obviously, the agency's power is going to get almost gutted.
I mean, even without the election, because if they can't do this, like, I just feel like their executive mechanisms are suddenly shrunk.
Totally,
like massively,
apart.
Right?
Now, I've read some people say that it's not as bad as it seems.
Okay.
We'll be able to get through it. I think like a past FTC chairman said it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Okay.
We'll adjust. They'll be flexible. It won't be a fire alarm. I don't know, man. For me as an outsider, it looks like a fire alarm. From what I've read about the New Deal, this would be a fire alarm moment for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He would come at this and threaten to expand the court right now.
Yeah.
Right? He would not have this.
Yeah. The only way that it's not bad, or the only argument that I imagine the other side having is like these federal agencies are, they have a tendency to become corrupt. And so it's better to trust. That's why we can't trust their decision making and instead can trust a jury of our peers. But I don't think you would actually find any evidence for that to be the case.
That's exactly where I was going to go with that, right? There's no evidence that these agencies would be corrupt.
Yeah.
So now we have this. Now we just have a big problem on how we're going to regulate the marketplace. It's going to be difficult. Progressive legislation and progressive change is going to be harder. Antitrust is going to become more difficult. All these things are going to get harder now.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Goodness.
I don't know the way to reverse this. And this is one of those stories that falls through the cracks. That isn't going to get the top line headline.
Yeah.
The top line headline is going to be about the two old men yelling at each other on the debate stage tonight. Tonight.
Or even today, the other Supreme Court decision about the Purdue's not being immune from prosecution.
And listen,
that's more soap opera.
And let's just say really quick, I'm glad the Sackler family isn't protected. That's great.
Yeah.
Happy. Good.
Yeah.
Is it really more important than the entire destruction of our regulatory system? No.
But
what's the head of the New York Times?
Problem.
This is a large systemic problem
that
I don't know how the executive branch is gonna adjust to.